When the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Welcome. This is the RNL Revolution Nothing Less Show. This is our 102nd episode on May 19th, 2022. My name is Andy Zee, and I am coming to you from Los Angeles, California. We began today's RNL Revolution Nothing Less Show with the words, the challenge, the relevance of the words of Mario Savio, a leader of the free speech movement at the University of California in Berkeley on December 2nd, 1964. As a momentous battle is getting underway today to fight for the right to abortion, the spirit of these words inspire and direct. Today's show is going to begin with a commentary on the moment we are in, followed by a video of the protests for abortion rights this past week. And after that, we're going to show a filmed excerpt of a speech by the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, where he discusses Christian fascism. And this will be followed by an excerpt from a national Zoom forum that dug into some of the questions that are coming up, the crucial and controversial questions that are coming up in the fight for abortion rights. And before I begin with the commentary, if you haven't seen our 100th episode that we aired 2 weeks ago, do so as soon as you can and spread the word about the RNL Revolution Nothing Less Show, including contacting your friends right now to watch today's show. So let's begin. Last Saturday, May 14th, a white supremacist, 18-year-old named Peyton Gendron, came armed to the teeth and encased in body armor and got out of his car and shot two people in the parking lot of the only supermarket in a mainly black neighborhood in Buffalo, New York. And then he systematically walked into the grocery store, killing and maiming. Gendron, a self-proclaimed fascist, neo-Nazi, and white supremacist, had planned this for years, and he had driven 200 miles from a mainly white, rural New York county to carry out his attack. His purpose was broadcast and written online, and it was to kill as many black people as he could, and to inspire other people like himself to carry out similar attacks. The blood of over a dozen black people and the tears of millions have poured out. Volleys of bullets from Peyton Gendron's AR-15 Bushmaster slashed through the bodies of 13 people, 11 black and 2 white, who either worked in the store or were food shopping. 10 died. The blood and tears joined the flood of blood and tears of 400 years since the first enslavement of black people, and then the terror of the lynch mob during 90 years of Jim Crow, and now the blood and the tears that still flow of the masses of black people discriminated against, mass incarcerated, brutalized, and murdered by police. Now comes this latest mass murder, driving home the rise of a fascist movement nurtured in the white supremacy woven into the fabric of America. Once again, as happened in Charleston, South Carolina church in 2015, black people are methodically murdered by a white youth carrying out the mission of a fascist white supremacist movement fighting for a white fascist country. These acts are not those of an isolated, disturbed youth, but are fed at the trough of Tucker Carlson and the Trumpite fascist Republican Party.
Law enforcement officials say this alleged shooter posted a 180-page manifesto online just days before the attack, and it draws on and references replacement theory at least 28 times.
The Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually.
They can't win re-election in 2022 unless they bring in a large number of new voters to replace the voters that are already here. That's what this is about. We have an invasion in this country.
Absent an organized force of a people determined to defeat this fascism, Buffalo, Charleston, and more could be but prelude to a fascist America and even the early shots of civil war. Do not dismiss this as hyperbole. Just look at the shock that many felt at the draft decision of the Supreme Court to strip away the right to abortion. For decades, for years, down to just a few weeks ago, too many people disregarded what we, the Revcoms, led by Bob Avakian, and a few others, have warned that this Handmaid's Tale was coming. But this was dismissed as extremism, as hype. And now such people cannot believe the nightmare that half of humanity faces. I could and probably should go on to spell out the danger of the existential crisis of environmental devastation that could make much, if not all, of the earth unable to sustain human life. Or I could speak of the heightened risk of nuclear war as the United States and NATO under its direction has transformed the defense of Ukraine from the brutal Russian invasion into a proxy inter-imperialist conflict. Every day this goes on, the danger ratchets up by the words and actions of President Biden, who smells the blood of gaining strategic advantage over his fellow brutal gangster rival in Putin and Russia. I could speak, too, of the situation of refugees on the U.S. border, as horrific as they are today, could be if Title 42 is not extended by the Biden administration next Monday. The border could become an even more unbelievable horror. And then there is the rising fascist movement in state after state, nominating lunatic, white supremacist, truth-denying, patriarchal fascists for state and national offices, all while the MAGA mobs organize and rally. So I went ahead to recount all this because this has been met way too much with complacent ignorance. Then, when a massacre like happened in Buffalo, or the leaked draft decision of the Supreme Court bursts into the news, too many decent people lift their eyes, but only for a moment, and only to bury them again in their self-absorption. All this describes, in brief, the worst of times, as Charles Dickens began his novel, A Tale of Two Cities. However, Dickens' full beginning is this: it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. This past week burst forth the first blooming of a spring of hope, a spring of struggle, a beginning lifting of the cloud that obscures what could be possible when people raise their heads and struggle against the power and the lies of tradition that keep humanity locked in the present of oppression and ignorance. Last Thursday, thousands of high school and middle school students, along with a few college campuses, walked and ran out of school, taking to the streets to demand and to fight for the right to abortion. The energy and the rage of these young women and girls, as well as the boys and differently gendered teens, as to how the highest court could rob them of control of their bodies and their futures, was inspiring. A passion has been uncorked with the potential to rock the country. Then, as word spread that a movement was taking root to fight to stop the Supreme Court from outlawing abortion outright, more than 10,000 took to the streets on Saturday, May 14th, behind these slogans: overturn Roe? Hell no. Abortion on demand and without apology. Forced motherhood equals female enslavement. If you weren't there on Saturday, you will see this on the RNL Show. You will see the ferocious joy, the determination, and the passion to not let this fascist assault go down. You will see this in the faces of the youth. It is evident in the outrage of testimony of those who lived through pre-Roe America. And you will see this in the eyes of women from Latin and South America who know of the struggle waged in Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico, a determination born of a struggle that defied the state week after week in massive numbers, forging unity among people of very different life experiences, viewpoints, and politics, to stand together for half of humanity. Saturday also saw a positive step by the mainstream women's and pro-choice movements, calling rallies around the country in response to the vicious draft Supreme Court decision and the outrage that called forth. Several tens of thousands of people came out to these marches, with the march across the Brooklyn Bridge in New York and the march to the Capitol giving expression to the potential for the unity and the breadth that the women from Latin America urged. At the same time, the program put forth by many of the organizers of these mainstream rallies accepted defeat by the Supreme Court and put forward a program of channeling people into voting for the Democrats, along with providing aid for women to travel to get an abortion when Roe v. Wade is overturned. And in some of these mainstream rallies, this was ginned up with calls for a summer of rage, which if real would be good. Yet right now, this is covering over the reality that we need a spring of rage, and that has already begun to compel the Supreme Court to not overturn the right to abortion at all. The piercing of what have been dark times by the light of the masses taking to the streets in determined struggle is of great moment. Fighting against forced motherhood and female enslavement is about what kind of world we are going to live in. If half of humanity are not free, none are. But there is more, both negative and positive, a terrible future versus the potential for a truly emancipating future. The fight to deny women the right to abortion, as we have said many times on the RNL Show, is the battering ram and the linchpin of a whole fascist program. It is the door through which a Christian fascist movement was forged 45 years ago. Over decades, this has merged with virulent fascist threads in U.S. society that came to fruition with the Trump-Pence regime in 2016. And in the wake of Trump's defeat in 2020 and the January 6th fascist assault on the U.S. Capitol as cause and rallying cry, this fascist movement has hardened and deepened both outside and inside of state and federal governments. There is a direct link between what drove the white supremacist teenager to travel to Buffalo to murder black people and the patriarchy that would outlaw abortion, with LGBTQ rights and even birth control next in their crosshairs. Christian fascism is a program of white supremacy, patriarchy, and xenophobia wrapped in the Bible with America First militarism at its heart. It is a program for a white Christian fascism to be what rules. For those who did not see this coming, and to those who saw it coming and then turned away. For those who heard but shut their ears. To everyone who didn't know, and to everyone who knew but chose to turn away. The hour is late, but there is still time to act, and that time is now. And while we join in this fight for the right to abortion, recognize this reality from Bob Avakian.
This is one of those rare times and circumstances when revolution becomes possible. Not just because this system is always a horror, but because the crisis and deep divisions in society now can only be resolved through radical means of one kind or another. Either radically reactionary, murderously oppressive and destructive means, or radically emancipating revolutionary means.
Bob Avakian brings this reality alive in this work. He says because people's lives are and will be repeatedly upended, because the normal way things have been will no longer hold. This can shake people's belief that the way things have always been is the only way things can be. And if there is a force out in society, if all of you who are watching this show get with the RevComs, and if we get out in the midst of all that is going down and bring out the reality that all of this is rooted in the system of capitalism, imperialism, and if we are at the same time leading people to stand up and fight the power and transform the people for revolution, if we are bringing to people the science of the new communism developed by Bob Avakian, letting them know that there is a strategy to prepare for and to lead an actual revolution and working with them on that, if we are taking to people the liberating constitution for a new socialist republic in North America that not only is a blueprint for a radically different and far better society after the revolution, but would also be in a process of the struggle for the full emancipation of humanity throughout the world. Raising sights to this can fire imaginations, aspirations, and the growing commitment of a new generation for revolution, so that this spring and summer of rage is also a spring of real hope, heralding the best of times. So as we bear down for a spring of uniting with everyone from every strata and part of society to fight to stop the Supreme Court from denying the fundamental right to abortion, I urge you to get into this, to spread this, the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show every week. Go to revcom.us and dig into Bob Avakian, his writings and his films. Get with the revolution clubs. Together, let's make this the best of times. Now we want to take you to the student walkout on May 12th and to May 14th, a day of righteous outpourings across the country to defend the right to abortion. First, we want to show you a roundup of what these demonstrations look like all across the country. Then we're going to hear from speakers at the Rise Up for Abortion Rights rally at Union Square, leaders of that movement, as well as others speaking from different perspectives on the importance of taking to the streets to actually try to stop the Supreme Court from taking away abortion rights. And we will also be showing a speech from a leader of Refuse Fascism in Austin, Texas, where there has been a near total ban on abortion in place for several months now.
Less than 2 weeks after the leak of the draft Supreme Court opinion by fascist Justice Alito that would overturn Roe v. Wade, tens of thousands of people poured into the streets in more than 450 cities across the country against the moves to take away the right to abortion. Rallies and marches took place in New York City, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and other major cities, as well as in smaller cities and towns from coast to coast. The day of protests were called for by Rise Up for Abortion Rights, as well as more mainstream organizations like Planned Parenthood, the Women's March, and Move On. A significant contingent within these protests were youth and students who have been a part of walkouts in the days leading up to these rallies. These powerful demonstrations, taken as a whole, made unmistakable the potential for people to really rise up and wage relentless, determined struggle to actually force the Supreme Court to back down. Most people went to the more mainstream demonstrations, and it was definitely a good thing that these happened. At the same time, the program from the stage was often bogged down in Democratic Party politics, focused on voting after Roe is overturned.
The ballot this November, you will all be able to vote. We need you to vote.
A program that both leads nowhere good and actually draws people away from the fight that urgently needs to be waged now. That's part of why it was important that more than 10,000 people in major cities, including many who also participated in the more mainstream events, marched in the streets in actions called for by Rise Up for Abortion Rights.
Our power is out here in the streets. Not only is waiting till November too late, the Supreme Court will already have ruled by then. It's too late. We need to stop them now. We will be bolder, and bolder.
Now is the time to fight with all we got.
We have to shut the whole country down.
These May 14th abortion protests represented an opening wave with the potential not just to derail the locomotive, now speeding down the tracks to outlaw abortion, but to begin to change the whole direction of things. Whether that potential is realized is in significant part up to those of you watching this.
I'm Sam Goldman, and I am here just like you're here, because we have a moment right now to act, to stop the Supreme Court from taking away abortion rights.
How could they be so bold to think that women's lives and women's dreams are there to define and control? How could they reverse a fundamental human and civil right that has been stitched into the fabric of this society? Well, they could, and it looks like they just might. But we will be bolder and bolder and bolder and stop them. We are here to state that women must retain the moral, legal, and constitutional right over her decision whether or not and when to become a mother. Your body is your country, and you are the only resident. This is not about love and concern for babies, or even what or is or not in the Constitution. This is about power. This is a power struggle. And grafting a Christian fundamentalist ideology onto our most private of decisions. This is about a democratic republic becoming a theocracy. Do you smell it? Do you smell it? I smell the whiffs of an inquisition coming. No exceptions for rape or incest. None for ectopic pregnancies. Fetal homicide charges for the woman. Life for a doctor. We are entering very dark times. I would say back to the Dark Ages. So each one of us has to be a focus of light in that darkness. A focus of light.
Hello, beautiful people. Yes, I am honored to be here on behalf of Councilwoman Kristen Richardson Jordan for this important event, okay? Yes. Overturning Roe v. Wade would have disastrous consequences. As we all know, abortion is health care. Criminalizing abortions will not stop them from happening. It will only prevent people from finding safe methods. So let's talk about it. Compared to carrying a full-term pregnancy, abortions are safe. Every year in the United States, 50,000 people have unexpected outcomes of labor and delivery with serious health consequences. Overturning Roe v. Wade will overwhelmingly harm Black women, who are 3 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related cause. It will have a greater impact on any and every low-income communities like my own, as those families seeking abortions may not be able to travel to neighboring states where services remain legal. No one should be forced to bear a child against their will, so let's talk about it. Hey everybody! How are you? Angry! Scared! And powerful! We are here today to say that the Supreme Court will not get away with this. They will not get away with this. It is crazy that this is what has come to, that we are out here today, but this is what is necessary.
You wonder why a transgender woman's up here? Because abortion rights are LGBTQ people's rights, and they are also trans men's rights. I know quite a few trans people who are married to trans women, and they create families together. Therefore, abortion rights are trans rights, the LGBTQ rights, and we must keep abortion legal. Abortion rights are human rights. Don't fuck with it. Abortion rights are human rights. Don't fuck with it. Abortion rights are human rights. Don't fuck with it. Abortion rights are human rights. Don't fuck with it. Thank you.
We're here because we are angry and because we are demanding that we be treated as full, legal human beings under the law. Nobody owns my body. New York State doesn't own my body. Mississippi doesn't own my body. North Dakota doesn't own my body. The United States of America doesn't own my body. And for sure, those 5 people on the Supreme Court, the Ayatollahs of America, they don't own my body either. There's a very famous comment that comes out of the experience of the Nazi regime in Germany. And this pastor said, when the Nazis first came for the communists, I didn't care. I wasn't a communist. I didn't say anything. And then they came for the socialists, and I wasn't a socialist, and I didn't say anything. And then they came for the Protestants, and I wasn't a Protestant, so I didn't say anything. And then they came for me, and there was no one to stand up for me. And one other thing, it's not just that they're taking the rights away from women. And by the way, it's not just grown women. We're talking about children and young girls who are victims of incest and rape. Imagine. But what they are saying is that this wasn't a deep-seated right in the Constitution. And they cite judges and jurists who said we weren't in the Constitution and women have no rights. If you cite people from the 16th and 17th and 18th century who were against women's rights, period, who said women were property, that husbands could beat them, that they could rape them, that they had basically no rights, these are the people we should listen to today? Are we going to ask slave owners what rights black people should have today? Are we going to ask Hitler what rights Jews should have today? We can't be asking these women haters from 300 years ago what rights women have today. We say no.
So my question is, and the reason why I accepted and why I've been marching and speaking is, I said to myself, if not me, who? If not now, when? Because the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking, right? So they don't care about the unborn. Let me tell you, what is it that Republican legislators care about? Women are becoming too successful. Women are becoming too highly educated. And guess what? The marriage rate is down. Well, we're not getting married, at least heterosexual marriage. Women are not marrying men because of the income and financial resources they can provide. We have our own money. We have our own success. More women, even despite the fact there's still a wage gap, right? In New York City, I think it's 80 cents to the dollar that every dollar a white man makes, and for a black woman, it's 60-something cents, and for Hispanic women, it's 40-something cents. Even with that, we're becoming the primary income earners in our families more and more. So that is what they're afraid of.
Abortion on demand.
Abortion on demand.
Without apology.
Without apology.
Come on, rise up for abortion rights, rise up. Rise
Rights has held. But at rallies across this country by Planned Parenthood and Move On and other organizations, we need this. But we also need real talk, sisters and brothers and beautiful people. We need real talk. Because just as this shockwave of alarm is spreading, just as people are coming out into the streets, there is also a louder and louder drumbeat being pushed by Democratic Party politicians and by so-called leaders who are tied to them, that the most realistic thing we can do is channel our energies off the streets and into the elections in the fall. This is something that the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, who I follow, has warned about in an important new article at revcom.us. And he makes the point, and I'm going to make the point, that our power is out here in the streets. Not only is waiting till November too late, the Supreme Court will already have ruled by then. It's too late. We need to stop them now. But the truth is that voting is not the way any fundamental right has ever been won. It's not the way any progress has been made. Think about it. Even the right to vote was not won by voting. It was won by sitting in, by walking out, by marching, by freedom riding, by going to jail, by going on hunger strike, by walking across that Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, knowing that there were brutal white supremacist law enforcement and good old boy Klansmen on the other side waiting to inflict barbaric violence. It took standing up. Yes! And on an even deeper level, sisters and brothers, beautiful people, these Democrats, they pose as champions of women and the oppressed, but the truth is they have facilitated this assault on women's fundamental right to abortion over decades. Over decades, they have sought common ground with these religious theocrats. There can be no common ground with those who would enslave women. They have run anti-abortion candidates, and they have ceded the high moral ground to these theocrats and Christian fascists. What else does it mean to say, as Hillary Clinton and so many others did for years, that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare? As if there's something wrong with it. There is nothing wrong with abortion. There is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with women controlling their bodies, their lives, their destinies. That is a great thing. That is a beautiful thing. We need abortion on demand and without apology. And here's another thing that these Democrats don't want to say, and that so much of the movement doesn't want to say. The assault on abortion has always been about controlling women. It has always been about controlling women. It's not about health care in the abstract. Of course abortion is health care, but clinics aren't bombed because it's health care. They're bombed because abortion gives women control over their lives and their destinies.
This Christian fascist movement that could not stand a world where women are not confined to the home, where black people can walk into any damn place they well please, and gay people are out of the closet. These Christian fascists could not stand that.
They're not interested in
and they were determined to take us back, and they lied, and they harassed, and they murdered, and they ran one lunatic politician after another, and by seizing the initiative, seizing the public square, seizing the terms of the debate, they have brought us to this moment. Yes, they are ruthless. They are terrifying in their ignorance and their hatred. And they are powerful, but they are not all powerful. There is one thing they fear more than anything else, and that is the people rising up. Women and girls filling the streets female in this society, in this world, means entering a world that is steeped in thousands of years of tradition's chains, a world dripping with misogyny, a world of rape, of sexual exploitation, of shame, and being told over and over again that you are worthless, that you are invisible, that your life and your body does not belong to you at all, but it is the property of men, of society, of the church, of the government. Losing the right to abortion and letting this country fall to Christian fascists will have a global impact.
Never again!
Because this is the most powerful country in the world.
Yeah.
So this is the time to fight for women, to fight for the half of humanity that is born female, because if half of humanity is not free, then no one is free.
I spoke of Christian fascism in the opening of today's show, and some of the speakers we just saw also mentioned this Christian fascism at the roots of the movement against abortion rights. So what we want to do is bring you an excerpt from the film of a talk by the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian in 2017 that he gave 10 months after the fascist Trump-Pence regime came to power. Before getting into this film, Bob Avakian is a revolutionary leader you need to know about. He became a revolutionary in the 1960s. In fact, he was a participant in the free speech movement with which we began today's show. But unlike most other leaders from the 1960s, Bob Avakian never gave up on revolution, but has developed a whole new framework for human emancipation, which we refer to as the new communism. You can read about Bob Avakian on the homepage of our website, revcom.us. Today we're going to see a short excerpt on Christian fascism, as I said, from BA's 2017 talk, "The Trump-Pence Regime Must Go. We Refuse to Accept a Fascist America. A Better World is Possible." This film, which is also on revcom.us, provides us with a scientific understanding of the roots of fascism in the history of the U.S., and in the deeper structures of the system of capitalism imperialism. This film is filled with insight, passion, humor, humanity, and a deep sense of history. Let's watch.
One of the most distinguishing and significant features of this particularly American version of fascism is the unholy alliance between Trump and fundamentalist Christian fascists. As I pointed out in another recent talk, Trump, I think it's fair to say, could not have won the election if the Christian fascists not only had opposed him, but if they'd been unenthusiastic about him. And even when the pussy-grabbing thing came out, they didn't turn against him, Jerry Falwell Jr. and all these others, because they recognized, here is somebody who is going outside of the whole rules and the way things are done in the swamp of Washington, who will actually carry through on this stuff, like outlawing abortion and suppressing gay people. And Trump, for his part, recognized that if he didn't get this force behind him, he was not going to be able to do it. Pence is obviously a critical linchpin in this uniting of what's represented by Trump and the Christian fascists. Perhaps it seems harsh, or even extreme, to refer to these fundamentalist Christians as fascists. Well, in Catherine Stewart's book, The Good News Club, The Christian Right's Stealth Assault on Americans' Children, she cites these comments by Rich Lang, himself a former Christian fundamentalist who broke with that and became a liberal Christian pastor. When I was born again, Lang recalls, faith was something inside of you, something you were supposed to reflect through your life. But in the 1980s, something happened. Fundamentalist Christianity jumped back into the public square with the intention to reshape the country as a Christian nation as defined by them. It's no different than the Nazis wanting to start with the Hitler Youth. That is where you'd want to start if you were trying to build a fascist movement. That's the word, fascism. Nobody likes to use it in this country. But I believe that in this country, underneath the appearances, that is exactly the great temptation of our time. And you have to call it what it is, Christian fascism. Stewart further summarizes Lang's views this way. Modern fundamentalism, like fascism in earlier times, he says, involves a strong feeling of persecution, typically at the hands of godless liberals or a religious other. The belief that one belongs to a pure race or national group that is responsible for past greatness, suffers unjust oppression in the present, and is the rightful ruler of the world. The impulse to submit unquestioningly to absolute authority, and the relentless drive for power and control. It is, he says, a kind of supremacist movement with religion rather than race at its core. And there is this chilling statement by Lang. People have no idea it's going on. What does it mean that the conservative church that's growing in America is an end times church? What does it mean that we are raising a generation of children to believe that they are the last generation? What is going to happen if we keep on telling them, don't care about the environment and bring on the war, because we're going to be lifted out of here? And you can forget about loving your neighbors because they're just going to get blown away. So that is the insight of someone very familiar with these Christian fascists. And the fact is that in this country, with its whole history of genocide, slavery, and racism, any form of fascism, including one basing itself on Christian supremacy, any urge to restore past greatness cannot help but be bound together with white supremacy. The Republican Party has been moving in a fascist direction since the late 1960s, with further leaps since then to becoming more and more openly fascist.
In the aftermath of the May 14th protests, we held a Zoom discussion that I conducted of a must-read article on revcom.us that provides critical orientation for the battle ahead. The article is titled, "The Supreme Court Moves to End Abortion Rights. Taking to the streets and refusing to let this go down, Bob Avakian speaks to this critical juncture in the fight for abortion, the road forward, and avoiding dead ends." We're showing just the first part of my opening presentation and then some excerpts of the Q&A that followed. Now, these excerpts focus on some controversial questions, and it gives you a taste of the kind of discussion, dialogue, and debate that needs to happen in the movement as we stand shoulder to shoulder in the streets to stop the fascist assault on abortion rights and in our fight for a just world. The title of this article defines the objective of our discussion. We're going to get into why we must refuse to let the Supreme Court end abortion rights, and how by taking to the streets and sustain mass determined struggle, we have a real fighting chance to stop them. We're going to get into what is the road forward in this battle and what is not, what we must do now and why, and what are dead ends and how do we avoid them. And there are huge stakes and implications of the battle that we have embarked on. The article from BA from Bob Avakian is a comprehensive piece on the juncture that we face now. And I'm going to first provide an overview of the article, and then we'll focus on just a few questions. Point one, Bob Avakian begins mincing no words. He states that those who insist that right now any meaningful opposition to this attack on abortion rights must be funneled into, once again, voting for the Democrats is dead wrong. He pulls back the lens so that we can see how and why a fascist and misogynist like Trump even got elected and was in position to nominate 3 fascist theocrats to the Supreme Court, and how the movement to outlaw abortion has become such a powerful force in this country with tremendous momentum. He states this important principle right up in the beginning of this article. He says, regardless of whether people vote or not, what is urgently needed now is massive sustained mobilization and resistance to make clear that taking away the right to abortion will not be allowed to go down, that things will be shut down before people will accept the right to abortion being taken away, end quote. So this is an important question, whether or not everything should be directed into voting and why it should not be. This is an important question, and the first that we're going to take up. Next, BA focuses on, quote, why denying the right to abortion is about controlling and degrading women. He states, quote, this fascist offensive to outlaw abortion is not about saving babies. It is about controlling women and reducing them to handmaid breeders of children under the domination of men. The Christian fundamentalist forces who are moving to take away the right to abortion also want to do away with birth control as well. The drive to outlaw abortion is about controlling women, enforcing their subordination to men and a male supremacist society. Over decades, and continuing down to today, in front of abortion clinics, as well as in their misnamed Right to Life marches, you can see these Christian fundamentalist fanatics waving their Bibles while they shout at women to stop striving for independence and obey the biblical command to be submissive and subservient to men. They quote their scripture, quote, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. And they end with wives should submit to their husbands in everything. This, when these anti-abortionists aren't killing, bombing clinics, maiming people, things they have done, as well as terrorizing women who are going in for one of the most important medical and procedures to regain their humanity by getting an abortion. These are cruel people who have a program. Bob Avakian writes, quote, denying women the fundamental right to control their own reproduction degrades all women, even those who may never get pregnant. It once again enshrines and enforces the subordination of women to the patriarchy. We should be clear on who the attack on abortion rights is aimed at and why. And in that context, how this attack impacts a host of other questions, from birth control to gay marriage to transgender rights. While this is fundamentally a matter of understanding the actual stated objective of these theocrats and fascists and the program they are attempting to implement, there is also a matter of scale and scope of who is being targeted here. In 2017, there were about 500 trans or non-binary Americans who had abortions, and there were 609,095 recorded abortions that year. You can read these statistics in an important article titled, quote, the abortion debate is suddenly about women, in The Atlantic. And the point of that article is that people have been erasing women, who are the class of people who are being targeted by this, as part of instituting a vicious, draconian, male supremacist program and the subordination of women.
Yeah, so the question I basically had was kind of concerning how we talk about abortion rights and what language we use, mainly focused around gender. Oftentimes, I think since I've started, kind of getting active in the movement, I hear it solely talked about as a women's issue. And it's often, from what I've seen, until I join a group of people and make it known that I myself am transgender, and kind of expand that knowledge of, hey, I'm also a person who needs access to abortion care. It's not till then that people start to change their language. And I think something that is also important to understand is that the Republican Party and people on the right are going to just immediately label anyone with a uterus as a woman. So I'm sure that's why they're using that language. But I think on our side, it is important to acknowledge and uphold the experiences of trans men and non-binary folks who need reproductive justice just as much as cis women do. So I guess my question would be, how can we ensure that the fight for abortion rights isn't leaving trans and non-binary people as an afterthought? And then what can we do to change our wording in this movement to be more gender inclusive? Okay, well, that's a good question and a big question, and it's
I will just repeat something that I read earlier that I think is important to understand, that the essential question at stake with the escalating attack on the right to abortion is the fundamental status of half of humanity that is female, whether they will be enslaved or emancipated. Of course, in the case of the extremely small number of females who have transitioned or are transitioning to males, but who retain female reproductive organs and might get pregnant, they should have the right to abortion and to decent health care overall without any stigma or discrimination. And in general, attacks directed against trans people must be actively and vigorously opposed. Because as you I'm sure you know, this is not just on the right to abortion that trans people are under attack. It's just rampant, particularly in some of those mid-Atlantic southern states. But also overall, this is a major thing all on bathrooms and on the books in schools. This is let alone literal brutal attacks on trans people. This is important to recognize, as Bob Avakian brings out. But he says, in terms of the essential and purpose and objective, the attack on the right to abortion is not aimed at trans people. Now, here you have to have a larger viewpoint to understand, does it affect trans people? Yes, it does. Those who have uteruses and decide to become pregnant, it affects them. Surely, and they should have the right to abortion. But the attack on abortion wasn't undertaken to be going particularly after trans people. They should be included in the fight around this. But the point to understand, and that's very critical for society, is that there is a Christian fascist force who, as I read these quotes from the Bible, are aimed at putting women back in their place as subordinate to men, which would, by the way, not only include trans people being put as subordinate, but probably just wiping them out if these people come to power. But it's very important to understand that this is an attempt to change the whole way that that women are viewed in this world. This is the chador. This is the burqa. This is women being subordinate, obeying their husbands, being subordinated to a patriarchy. The patriarchy exists now, but what they're going for is something much more total than this, which will sweep up with it things like birth control, gay rights, gay marriage. I don't want to take time to go into the weeds of the legal cases here, but there is a case called Griswold that and Oberfil, I think is the correct name. These cases are all predicated, all founded on the same principle of Roe v. Wade, the case around abortion. Should this be overturned, there is no longer a precedent, or the precedent that gave rights to trans people, rights to gay people, queer people. All of this is now going to be called into question. But it's very important to recognize, what does it mean to say that half of humanity, not half of humanity, does not have control over their own persons? That's a big deal. That's what this attack is aimed at. I think it's important to understand this, and that this political, this sort of a move to, within the progressive movements, to write women out of the picture is it's insane. It's insane. The problem is not the lack of inclusion of trans men in the right to abortion. I've been to a number of, including the first big rally of Rise Up for Abortion Rights, and several speakers spoke to that question. But you do have to recognize what an actual attack is aimed at, and what its purpose is, and where they're going with it. This is very important. There was I'm trying to think, one of the major abortion funds, I'm not able to recall the name, put out a whole thing of this attack. Who's going to be most affected by an abortion ban? It was the ACO. That's from the Helen Lewis article. Yeah. was the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. It listed 5 different categories of people who would be most affected, but one category was missing: women. This is absurd. It's dangerous. It's harmful. Because why is it dangerous and harmful? Because it's not actually looking at the actual content of the attack. It's missing what it's actually all about in the name of feeling pressure from some groups of people who I don't think really have the full interests of trans people in mind. Otherwise, they would recognize how much this has to be fought, and seeing that concentrated in the question of the liberation and emancipation of women is related to the whole question, very tied to the question of LGBTQ rights. So this is something that we really have to talk about in some depth, because it's a little bit nuts when you're dealing with abortion to not see that women are the primary class that are affected. I mean, I really feel this is a very important question, and I feel it's also taking a lot of young activists, both straight and differently gendered, and getting them whipped up around what should really be a non-question. Because there should be no question that abortion rights should extend to anybody who has the potential to become pregnant. And any discrimination against people who are differently gendered and don't identify as female or women should be vociferously opposed and be part of the struggle. But that doesn't mean that to accomplish that, you leave out who the actual attack is aimed at. And this is not a minor thing I'm saying. I'm not picking out some random examples. This is all over the place. And there's a lot of people going around attacking Sunsara Taylor and Merle Hoffman and Lori Sokol and Rise Up for Abortion Rights for using the word women. And that's just wrong. And people should not be snowed by that, because because this is now the vogue right now. This won't be the vogue for long, because it's not, it doesn't actually correspond to the reality of the attack. So I do very much feel and empathize with your concern as somebody transitioning to being male yet still retaining a uterus and with the potential to have a child if you desire, and want to have that right and want other people in that position to have that right. But don't be played in this kind of way, and recognize what this attack is really aimed at. And also recall the numbers I read. We're talking about 500 people up against 600 and some odd thousand, 650,000 people who are actually affected by this, which doesn't mean we should ignore the 500. If it was 50, we should deal with it, and incorporate it. But to erase women, no, that's not a good program.
The importance of that you're just saying here of that this is about an agenda to enslave women is just so important, and not understanding that leads to all of these other analyses. You get people saying, "Hey, white women, stop wearing Handmaid's Tale outfits because this isn't really about you. This is about This is about Black women and women of color, as opposed to recognizing what you were laying out, that there's a disproportionate effect." Or you have people saying, "Oh, well, wealthy women will always be able to get abortions. It's just going to affect the poor." Or people who think that we're safe here in blue states. I think So I think that not understanding that this is about a fascist juggernaut to enslave women leads people to really misunderstand what's happening and the stakes and what needs to be done to combat it.
Yeah, I remember there was such a message, especially during the Black Lives Matter movement, about how the All Lives Matter conversation was so huge, and it was so widely understood that the target is Black people, so therefore it's Black Lives Matter, and that phrase cannot change. I do feel like it did get a little bit lost in the Black Lives Matter movement, but I still feel like there was a sense of also acknowledging the victims of police violence of other races as well, especially in leftist communities, at least. So I just feel as though now it shouldn't be such an like, I don't even want to say that. Now I feel like we should just be focused on admitting that this is an attack on women and having that as our focal point for understanding how to fight back against it, rather than trying to figure out the logistics of how we should present the fight rather than just fighting, you know. Yeah.
Sure. I think that's basically right. You have to identify what the attack is, and then, they do, and then look at, well, what's giving rise to this? The revolution that I am for, that I've learned from Bob Avakian, is for the emancipation of all of humanity. It is actually scientifically, which means objectively, true that either all of humanity gets free or none of us are going to get free. As long as you have one section of the people oppressing another for advantage, that's going to be able to be the basis for the restoration of capitalism, even if it has been overthrown someplace. Obviously, that's a big thought. It's a big question. It's something that, we need to get into in more depth than we do in the revolution. As for this Handmaid's Tale a thing, that this is just about only white, you shouldn't have Handmaid's Tale. This is, it's, first off, it's just stupid. It's just idiotic. First off, if you've ever seen the movie, which has been updated, there are black handmaids. There's any woman who become pregnant was to become a vessel for these theocratic fascists who ruled the country of Gilead. And just by the way, anybody who's oppressed because of their gender, including the largest gender, which is women, and who are oppressed for this, that is something we should oppose. Any person of principle should oppose that. And I don't care if they're rich in that context, okay? And they're, as women, a rich woman can walk down the street and be catcalled and abused and also be raped and battered and bruised, and that is not right just because she's rich. The ideology behind that is one of revenge. It's one of revenge. It's one of, she shouldn't have that, I should have that. And very frankly, a lot of this stuff that you're seeing from certain sections of the movement are what we have called the entrepreneurs of oppression. These are people looking for, and they're arguing over who's getting the money, who's getting the funds. That's a lot of what's going on, folks. That's really a lot of what this is about when you really get down to it. Because if you're really against oppression, anywhere you see people oppressed, you want to be against it, and you want to help them fight for their liberation and freedom, and instead of pitting this against each other. And of course, in this country, where white supremacy and the oppression of black people, of Native people, of immigrants, is so woven into the fabric of this country that that should be at one of the forefronts of our struggle for liberation. But that doesn't mean then white women, you have no rights that we're going to respect because we are the ones who are most affected. Well, that's not going to get us where we need to go. Everybody who wants to see abortion rights, the right to abortion sustained, that continue, needs to unite. Even our struggle here over the different questions that have come up, but around language. This is one that is a struggle and discussion we should have while uniting in the streets to stop the taking away of the right to abortion. It's a real question, and we should continue to have that debate. And this is very important because part of how people learn what's actually the true, what's the actual reality, what's the actual problem we face, and the real solution to it is by comparing and contrasting programs.
But I want to close by emphasizing this, that right now, as we all know what's coming, but it is not yet law, we have a chance to do what women and girls and society as a whole needs from us. We need to stand shoulder to shoulder, whether you're going to end up voting for the Democrats in November or you're like me and you're trying to make a revolution that gets rid of the whole system that they and the fascist Republicans represent. Wherever you are coming from in this, we need to stand shoulder to shoulder. We need to stay in these streets. We need to raise our voices. We need to bring this country to a halt. So I want to call on everybody. Thursday, May 19th, back here, student walkouts. Thursday, May 26th, nationwide shutdown. Everybody go to the website. RiseUpForAbortionRights.org. Sign up. Volunteer. Don't just turn out, but become an organizer. We need people reaching out to professional athletes, to musicians and celebrities and influencers, to students and religious networks. We need everybody bringing everybody they can into this right now. So I want you to put your fist in the air, and I'm going to close out. When I say overturn Roe, you say hell no. And when I say no retreat, you say stay in the streets. All right? Overturn Roe? Hell no! Overturn Roe? Hell no! No retreat! Stay in the streets! No retreat! Stay in the streets! That's right. Thank you.
So in bringing today's show to a close, we're going to bring you a short segment that was produced by one of the members of the RNL crew on the importance of your getting involved with and spreading the RNL show. This is a great little clip, and it brings us back to the 100th episode of our program 2 episodes ago that you can find on our YouTube channel, and the launching of a campaign to build the audience and the participation and the funding base in this show, the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. So I'm going to say goodnight now for this episode, and I'll see you next Thursday night at 5 p.m. Pacific time and 8 p.m. Eastern time, and you can figure out the middle of the country on your own. Good night.
Hey, so I was watching the RNL show last night.
Oh yeah, yeah, I did too. It was so good.
Yeah. So what are you doing to share it with people?
What do you mean share it with people? I just watched the show.
What do you mean you just watch it?
What do you mean? What do I mean? I just asked you. What do you mean?
Okay, well, what are you getting out of this?
Oh, there's like cutting edge exposure of the system and its crimes, why they're actually happening, how we could stop them. There's this revolutionary analysis and leadership every single week.
Okay, well, then don't you think other people should have this too?
Okay, I see what you're getting at.
Yeah.
All right, so how do you spread the word?
Well, for starters, I don't watch it by myself. I watch it with my friends, and we talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, how else do you do it?
Why don't I just show you? You can print flyers for the show by clicking the link in the description of this video. Pass them out at school, work, parties, wherever you frequent. There's a QR code that takes people directly to the show, and inside, there's a template for people to cut out their own stencils. I'm using chalk spray to tag the skate park. You can make a banner with the show's name and handle and hang it over the freeway overpass. Or host your own watch parties. These are only a few examples of what people can do to grow the audience of this show and build the revolution that humanity needs. We want to hear from you. How have you been spreading the show? What ideas do you have? Drop them in the comments section below this video. Wow, that was so much fun, right?
That was so sick, man.
We should do this every Friday.
We should do this every day.